Welcome to GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with
Ivan Ozerets.
Ivan the Idiot. Actually, what's Andy Fissel call you? The dumb Russian?
Yeah.
Well, I know Andy well. You're smarter than both of us, but it's great that you can take the humor. We're going to call Lisa Pugliese LaCroix. We had her husband Kyle LaCroix on as a guest. Lisa, first I met her via the phone. Andy Brandi called me up. Lisa's one of Andy's former players. We're going to go through Lisa's journey in tennis and life, right up to where she was a freshman at Duke, and then she transferred to University of Florida, and played under Andy. So we're going to have this also be a tribute to Andy Brandi, late Andy Brandi, who just unfortunately passed away a few days ago at the age of 72. Andy called me up about Lisa. She was looking to have kids that are autistic have a GreatBase backboard. And then to hear Andy talk about Lisa and, so much admiration for her. And then certainly Kyle and Lisa came to visit our tennis school. That was one time. Another time I met them at the grand opening of the FM Performance Center. But for all of you listening, certainly besides this podcast, you can go to YouTube and just plug in Love Serving Autism, and we'll put it with the write-up with the podcast. No doubt she has a heart of gold. It's so altruistic, but a world-class human being. Let's get her on the phone. We'll talk about her journey in tennis and the nonprofit she's founded. And then we'll also spend some time talking about Andy Brandi.
Hi, Steve.
Lisa, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm here with Yvonne. Thanks for being a guest on our GreatBase Tennis Podcast.
Hey, Lisa.
Thank you for inviting me. Hi, Yvonne.
As you know, Kyle was a guest on our podcast.
Yeah.
Enjoyed having
I heard he was a guest on your podcast.
Yeah, with you got 2 dogs and 1 husband. Your husband, he certainly doesn't look like a tennis player. 6'6". He's a mountain of a guy. He, like yourself, has all sorts of letters that go with his bio.
Yeah.
But we can come back and talk about Kyle. But let's go with the dogs first.
Sure. Oh, okay. Hopefully,
go ahead.
Hopefully you don't hear them bark today in this during this time. I have 2. We have 2 dogs and a new puppy as of a week ago.
I saw Duke. I saw a picture of Duke on your website.
Oh yes, he's a mascot for Love Serving Autism. So Duke is 3 years old now. He's a 2nd generation golden doodle, and then our puppy is 9 weeks old. Her name is Daisy, and she is an Australian Shepherd Samoyed mix. And she will be in training also to become a certified therapy dog.
Wow! And how old is the puppy?
9 weeks old.
9 weeks old.
Yeah.
I know when we were prepping for this podcast, I shared a couple of tips that I picked up by studying dog trainers. That you're supposed to have never supposed to get 2 dogs at the same time. Mm-hmm. So now you have Duke and Daisy, right? So now
correct.
I was told that you always feed the older dog first and make, even though it's a short period of time, a minute or so, have the younger dog wait.
Yes.
But
Kyle is implementing that, yes.
But I like to tell competitive juniors that it takes about 4,000 commands to get a dog to do a task. Of course, they just want the biscuit, the tennis player. They want the win, the trophy, the UTR.
Right.
Bumped up.
Right.
And I think it takes a lot more than 4,000 commands to have a junior do a task.
Probably longer, maybe longer than a puppy.
but let's go back to the beginning. Obviously, starting in Memphis, Tennessee. How did you get so good at tennis?
Wow. Well, it wasn't something that was planned. My mother started playing tennis as an adult. And my father didn't really play a whole lot at that time, but we were in Memphis, Tennessee, and Phil Chamberlain was the director of tennis at the time at the Racket Club of Memphis. And my mother was scheduled for a private lesson and ended up being pulled into, I guess, a clinic of some sort. So she said to Phil, my daughter Lisa is going to take the lesson. And, I started at 5, and I guess he contacted my parents after and said, your daughter has some pretty good hand-eye coordination for her age. And my dad said, yeah, right. She's 5 years old, whatever, like he couldn't really believe it. But I started at a really young age, and I was also involved in soccer and piano at the same time. Yeah.
Phil Chamberlain's an Aussie, right?
Yes, he is.
He's been in that town a long time. I was fortunate to work with the nonprofit, the Memphis nonprofit. I was there for 21 months. Out of a group of us who were there for 24. I didn't meet him, but I certainly met his son. So many Aussies. I think of people like Ray Ruffles, Marty Mulligan, Sid Ball. I wrote down a bunch of names here. Don Candy, Warren Woodcock, Phil Dent, Ross Case, Jeff Masters. It just goes on and on. Obviously there's the Labors and the Emersons, Stolle. But I always tell the people that you have to remember that Roger Federer, Swiss champion, had a strong Aussie influence. Peter Carter and Tony Roach. What do you remember from Phil Chamberlain as far as how long were there? Then I know you moved to Florida, but typically the Aussies will teach doubles and teach all court skills, and because they have such a great historical perspective of tennis.
Right. I was around 13 years old when we moved to Florida. So how many years is that? About 8 or so years I worked with him. And I, obviously started just learning the basic skills, but I know he taught me a lot about, patterns and targets, and we would hit cross courts, and he was strategic. I never really specialized in doubles. I'll just say that right now, but I was more of a singles player. So I remember just him being a lot of fun. He was really encouraging. He wasn't super strict with me. He was encouraging. I remember that, very motivating, and just really enjoyed teaching me, and we got along quite well. And I have a picture. I remember this. I have a little picture that I still have of him giving me, it was summer camp of some sort, and he was giving me an award. And all you could see is like I was really long legs, tall at by that age. And he was just, you could tell he was proud, of teaching me and some of the accomplishments that I had achieved at that age in the southern section.
Yeah, let's go through the southern tennis section. But coming back to the Aussies, just on the the accomplishments in the 50s, 60s alone, I think they still, many of them will say, "Hey, still the greatest tennis nation." But playing in the South, that's what, 9 states, right? That's a large section.
Yes.
So you and your family, you covered a lot of miles.
Covered a lot of miles, and I started just fixating on tennis because I really enjoyed it. I love the repetition of hitting the ball against the backboard of the house, and my dad painted our garage like Wimbledon. I asked them to, so they had it all painted for me, and every day after school I'd come home and just rally inside the garage on the backboard. I'd do it for hours. Like, I'd want to skip dinner, I just wanted to hit tennis balls. And at that point, I knew, maybe soccer and piano were not as important to me, even though I was decent at piano, but I really wanted to focus on tennis. So started competing in tournaments in the southern section, and traveling a little bit to different states, and did well. I ended up number 1 in the South, and that was right around the time when we're about to move to Florida.
Tell us a little bit more about the garage. That's pretty creative. What type of teaching aids and what type of backboard do you have in the garage?
Well, they just painted, it was like a green, it was like just a white line, and a green background and a white line for the net. And just, there were people like, I think there were just different people, like a crowd, watching.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And I had a dog at the time, and he would sit on the stairs and watch me hit it back and forth like 100 times in a row. And I would have to count. Like, I was very into repetition, and I wouldn't leave until I hit a certain number. And that
was before the transition balls. You was just using regular tennis balls?
Yes, it was yellow. It was regular tennis balls. Yes.
A lot of great things.
And my parents,
a lot of great things start in a garage.
my parents would say all they hear was the da-doom, 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 in the house. Like it was just over and over again.
And how about growing up in Memphis? Was Phil Chamberlain at the private school, MUS, at that time, Memphis University School?
I don't think he may have, I don't think he was at that time. But I didn't really honestly know a whole lot outside of like me training with him. I would just go to the rec club and play. So my mom traveled a lot with me to all the tournaments. My dad was working. He's a bond trader. He was working in business. My mom would travel with me and she was more like my travel coach. And then when I would return, I would take lessons from Coach Phil.
He was at the University of Memphis as a coach first, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I met his son when I was there. He was working for
the
USTA Tennessee section.
Okay.
So before we go to Florida, tell us, were you an Elvis fan growing up in Memphis?
Oh, well, interesting you ask. My relatives are very into Elvis. My mom's side of the family, actually one of my grandmother's sister-in-law, who recently passed in her 90s, worked at Graceland. So every time I'd visit as an adult, she'd say, "Come over to Graceland and give you a tour," and I personally didn't get that into Elvis, but I know that it was a really popular theme. She even decorated like a room in her house with like all Elvis like memorabilia.
Yeah, for our listeners, I was fortunate to go through Elvis's home in Memphis. It's amazing, that whole park. The basketball team, the Memphis Grizzlies, I tell people, that team started in Vancouver. It was the Vancouver Grizzlies. And when they moved to Memphis, they should have become the Memphis Presleys. It's kind of like, no one asked me when the Miami Heat first were established and then they started a hockey team. They should have been the Miami Ice, but people don't ask me those things. But Boca Raton, you went from Memphis to Boca, correct, at age 13?
Yes. My father he started a new job in Boca, in the same industry. And so we all moved as a family, my mom, my dad, my brother, and I. And I started high school in Boca.
Was your brother a tennis player as well?
Yes, but you know what? And, he ended up being one of the top soccer players in the state. So he actually would have been better than me maybe in tennis, but because his sister played tennis, he chose to play soccer. And he was on a soccer scholarship to UCLA, and then he ended up transferring to UNC Charlotte. But he still, plays like a little bit semi-pro now. He's a very talented athlete. So didn't really compete at the level I did in tennis just because he focused more on soccer. Well,
two athletes on scholarship. Were your parents athletes?
Well, not in college, collegiately, but they've run like 8 or 9 marathons each. So yes, very athletic.
Wow.
That's great.
One time I was a perennial tennis bum at Boca Raton. I went to Boca first in 1974. Tell us about that transition.
Oh, it was a big one. Being raised in Memphis, Tennessee, and everyone's so friendly, just cultural. It was so different moving to Boca. And I was just, everyone in Memphis says, "Hey, y'all, how you doing?" And then you move to the South Florida, and it's such a mix of everyone. And I was still waving to the neighbors, and no one's really looking at me or waving. And I thought, wow, they're not nice here. Like, it's such a different mentality. So it was a bit of a switch for me, and I went to an all-girls school up until high school. And it was my freshman year in high school was like co-ed, boys in my class. So it was like big change for me. I was really shy too, introverted. So it's one of those where you go to an all-girls school and there's a dress code, and then I went to St. Andrews, which is a private school in Boca. But, you just have to adjust to the boys being in classes, and everyone's from different states, and it was just much different.
With, being from the South, I'm from the Northeast, and actually, I think it's changed now where people from everywhere in South Florida. But when I went to South Florida in the 70s, it was so many people from the Northeast. I always tell people I'm a New Yorker. There's two types of New Yorkers: the Hicks and Slicks, and I'm a Hick from the country, but the Slicks, yeah, it's a different pace of life than in the South. When you went to St. Andrews, that's a beautiful prep school. Was George Andrews the headmaster?
Yes, George Andrews was our headmaster. And I did attend. My father said to us one day, he sat my brother and I down, and I was more of like the straight A, I've got to do well in school, and my brother was the social one. So he gave us a choice whether we wanted to go to St. Andrews private school or Spanish River, which was a public school. And I chose the private school route, and my brother chose the public school.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it turned out George Andrews, yes, he was the headmaster at the time. Have you met him? Do you know him?
Well, a connection. He loves tennis. He was a big fan of Peter Burwash, the late Peter Burwash, who's one of our pillars. And then I was the director of tennis at Seguzo Bassett. And then he allowed us to use dorms at St. Andrews before they had apartments built at Seguzo Bassett. And George, he was the headmaster of the prep school I went to in New Hampshire. So I had a couple different connections with George. I know that Tucker Carlson, the journalist, is married his daughter.
Oh, okay.
That's many years ago now.
Yes.
With but at St. Andrews, they had really strong tennis, though.
We did. So we had Vince Spadia was in my class. We had his sisters, Luann and Deanna Spadia. We had Karina Marariu in our class, on our team. Who else do we have? I'm thinking. That was the majority of us. But we won state championships. Like, we were a very strong tennis team, and none of us really trained with the team. We kind of did our own thing, but we did practice together occasionally there at the school.
With tell you a story about Vince Spadia Sr. So I was a tennis bum in Florida. I came out of the hockey world, and I was told to be a tennis teacher, tennis coach, you had to learn how to play first. So I went to Boca, worked nights and hit balls. But I remember Vince Jr., he was probably 5 years old when I was leaving. I was heading out to work for Vic Braden. Initially as a volunteer. And I remember Vince Sr., he just wanted me to help with setting up matches. He was setting up matches for his 5-year-old at that time. So all these years go by, and I come back, and Robbie Seguzo was helping Vince when he was 17. So then Dave Anderson and I were there. Vince Spadia was a great player before we started working with him. But I remember doing video work for Vince Sr. for one of the sisters, and I have it to this day.
Joanne, maybe?
I think they both won the Orange Bowl, right?
Well, Luann did. I don't know if Deanna did, but Luann was always number one.
Okay, so it was Luann, and Vince Sr. was so enthusiastic. I did application like short toss, 3 serves going forward on the jog, and if you toss really high, you can't do the drill, and putting a ball under her front heel. I still have us all in film, and I remember, Robbie Seguzo and his wife Carleen Bassett. Quite a few people were watching. And I said, this is what needs to be done to improve her serve. But Vince Sr. was so enthusiastic, so energetic for match play. He goes, okay, this afternoon she's going to play matches. I go, no, you need to take at least, 3 weeks and let's work this out. But we have a film of Karina Marariu that we share with, and she was very well taught, but she took the racket low twice on the backhand side. She took the racket low, high, low. And what I was doing with Karina, what an amazing tennis program that her father Alvin put together. At one point, at 1 hour a week, she just returned Colin Dibley's serve. And I don't know if you remember his name from Boca, but Colin Dibley,
I do.
He was a police officer. He's a good mate of Rod Lavers. And Lavers said, you should try the tour. And Colin Dibley, he had a very successful career. But he started late. He was actually a police officer. But he had at one point the fastest serve in tennis.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So Karina had the luxury, Alvin, who's a brain surgeon, he was the architect of her game and basically said, I want you to serve to her for 45 minutes. The last 15 minutes, you can do anything you want. And,
Wow.
I think she ended up the highest ranking in 28 in singles, but, won the
Was she? Okay.
Wimbledon doubles title with Lindsay Davenport. But
Mm-hmm.
she only played 2 junior national tournaments. And Albin was famous for saying, no one remembers who wins a weekend tournament in Miami, a junior weekend tournament. But I remember finally convincing him. I said, we don't swear on the podcast, but the person coaching her at the time, they actually married, but I used to just introduce him as Larry's son of a. And he would just laugh, and no one would catch the fact that it was much easier to do that than try to pronounce his last name. But so I finally said to Albin, you and I just look at film. And I said, there's just a couple things that we'd recommend. She's so good. And I remember he just hit the keys on the desk and said, he went outside and said, you're not going to Europe. You're going to stay and, make that adjustment on your backhand, keeping the racket up high. But no, that's quite a tennis town. I mean, all the clay courts. And what pros did you work with when you were in Boca?
Well, I worked a lot with Matt Mitchell. I'm not sure if you know who he is.
Yeah, I went to Stanford, did so well at Stanford, right?
Yes. So he was my coach for a while. Another coach who's still in the industry, he teaches here in South Florida, Morris Brown.
Yeah, I don't know Morris.
Don't know if you know Morris Brown.
I know the name, but with I met Matt Mitchell at one point because I was training tennis teachers at one point, and he was connected with Vitas Gerulaitis, and they were making inroads, all those tennis courts in Delray, the Delray Beach. Now I guess the city has taken over and they control most of those clay courts. But go ahead. I was just going to say, with the coaches and adjusting to the clay, did you play much on clay in the South?
No, it was a lot more hard court. So clay, and even though hard court is still to this day my favorite surface, it suits my game a bit better, I think. And so I did have to learn how to play on clay.
With and what any of the particular club that you trained out of, or just out of St. Andrews?
It's just different. Like I played at Lavers a lot.
Okay.
I also played at Gary Kessel Tennis Academy.
Yeah.
And I never a little bit at Saddlebrook, but like the polo club where we lived, I could train there because they had courts there in Boca. So it was just different courts, different facilities. Were
you at the polo club when Steffi Graf was there?
She was my next door neighbor. Can you believe it?
Wow.
Next door neighbor. Yeah. A funny story was when we moved in, my father told me, Steffi Graf is our neighbor. And I was young, but I was like, oh, really? Wow. I've heard of her. That's amazing. And so one day, we had a dog, of course. And one day, Steffi was outside and my dad said, hey, could you do me a favor and walk our dog into our house and surprise my brother? Because my brother knew her from TV and stuff. So she grabbed she started walking our dog into the house, and my brother looked up and was like, oh, hello. Like, it's Steffi. And she was as nice as could be. My mom is still friends with her mom, Heidi, to this day. They were just super nice to us. I remember my bedroom wall was literally next to hers. So it was that close, houses, and the paparazzi. I remember hearing I don't know, helicopters, whatever it was, flying over, trying to get pictures of her and just all kinds of things going on.
Wow.
So, and Chris Everett lived in our, not in our development, but she was in the polo club as well at the same time.
With, Boca Raton.
Andy Mill. And I think he was married to Andy Mill. So my parents did become friends with her as well. Cause it's like a social club and everyone goes, the members get together. So, it was quite, it was interesting group. And Jean Mills, was the director of tennis.
Yeah. She still is, right?
Yeah. Well, no, she retired, in 2023.
Okay. Wow. No, she has a very impressive background. Yeah, Andy Mills is a skier. That's
Yes.
the father, Chrissy, and I think they have 3 children. With I remember being in Boca, I became friends with Tim Gullickson, and I was at Boca West where he had a place, and his relatives in. It was either Thanksgiving or Christmas time, and I can't remember. It was one of the nephews. It was the big thing was, hey, you want to go see Ivan Lendl's townhouse? And so Tim Gully, I mean Tom Gully as well, but Tim was ranked, I think, 15, 16, 17 in the world, and it was kind of a Rodney Dangerfield moment because I get no respect. Because they want you to show you Lendl's apartment. Well, but there are listeners they should go to YouTube and watch Steffi Graf. Watch Steffi Graf move her feet. Amazing.
Oh, I would watch her practice as I was younger, and I would watch her practice at the polo club. And I just remember her just in hitting sessions. She never walked. Like in between shots, she'd run, pick up balls. She was always running, and you could tell she had very dedicated, like a disciplined work ethic.
Yeah, her heels never touched the ground. There's a famous story about her where she, there's one similar to Bjorn Borg, but they just asked her to run 2 laps, and her time was enough or good enough to put her on the Olympic team for Germany.
Wow.
But the work ethic and how hard she worked with her feet, amazing.
And she was so kind. I mean, just knowing her as a neighbor, just very friendly, humble, down to earth, a nice person.
Yeah. With Steffi Graf. I mean, what an amazing champion.
When I told my husband's favorite female, if you ask Kyle his favorite female tennis player of all time is Steffi Graf. So when I told him she had been our neighbor, he could not believe it. Yeah.
No, I think she lived in Boca for like 7 years, right? With well, tell us about it. If you were one in the South, how did it go for you? Were you a little bit shocked, or you just had no problem adjusting to a little higher level of play?
If you were to ask my parents, my father and mother discussed, like, do you think Lisa's ready for this transition to Florida? They knew what we were getting into, but like I didn't know. I was young, naive, and I was always the one that called the ball in, even if it's 10 feet out. Right? That was just my mentality. And I was all about sportsmanship awards, but I wanted to win. But I was so thrown into things. Which actually benefited my game tremendously by moving to South Florida with the level of competition. Like one of my first tournaments, I encountered Mary Pierce, and Mr. Spadia was there too, and like the two of them were watching, and it was just like, wow, it was a total different scene, right, than Memphis, Tennessee. So I'm glad that my father moved, because he also had job offers in New York and in California and different areas, but we did move to South Florida, so it all was meant to be. But I was just stunned, just with not only the level of competition, I guess, but it was more just the behaviors and the attitudes and the level of like cheating on court. And at one point, one of the juniors yelled at my father because I was beating her, and she said, "Shut up and sit down," and like just things that were going on. I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah, no, I remember my son, Mikhail, father came, my son was winning, and this gentleman wasn't a gentleman. He came up and he spit at my kid during the changeover.
Oh, wow.
Just like crazy.
Yeah.
With your bio says that you were ranked 1 in the state 3 different times. Was that in high school, or is that junior tennis?
Junior. It was 14, 16, and 18. So it was in Florida.
Wow.
Yeah. So I obviously, I knew that Florida was a different level, and I think it pushed me to train harder. And I was never really one to just not like my brother, who was feisty and competitive and, pumped his fist on the court. I wasn't like that. I would just hit the ball as hard as I could. And I wanted to win, but I was kind of like quietly competitive, if that makes sense. and I just, I think that moving to South Florida was really good for my game. I learned to play on clay, like you said, and the competition was just much more intense. But yeah, it helped me, I guess, and I ended up, staying number one for that, quite a while here.
Lisa, did you have an accelerated schedule when you were at St. Andrews? In other words, did you do half days or did you do full days?
No, I was in school full days, and I would train after school. And yeah, and interesting you say that, because I never really attended an academy or did like half day school. I was very into academics, and I guess it was just how what I wanted to do. So I would train after school probably for about 2 hours with a coach, and then do fitness and tennis. But I really wasn't like splitting my day with a school and tennis, I'd say. So I would,
The name's Stacia Fonseca. Is that your age group at all?
Oh, I don't know that name.
Yeah, so she's probably, I'm going to guess much older, but she actually tied a Chris Evert record where she was finished number one in every age group, 12s, 14s, 16s, 18s. So it sounds like
in Florida.
In Florida, so it sounds like you were very close to doing it, except for you were in the 12s in the South. Wow.
Yeah. Right.
I mean,
that's interesting.
I mean, the Chris Evert records obviously go way beyond junior tennis, but I've got down here in my notes. Actually, my son Connor was one in the 18s in Florida, but by the time he was one in the 18s, not to take anything away from him, I think back when you played, it was, just level 1 nationals. It wasn't level 2, level 3, and
I don't even know about the levels. Like, it was just nationals. Or
you think with
right?
It was simpler back many years ago. Where now with homeschooling, it's like get your checkbook out, and people are traveling all over. And I think in a lot of ways, I mean, I know the stats are there. Like say, for example, in the Midwest, that they developed more pro players before the advent of the academy. But the expression, I've had quite a few players be number one, and that's true. But still, quite a few is still a few. I mean, it's so difficult to be number one. What was your game style? Were you all court baseliner?
Baseliner. So I laugh at that because I'm going to talk about my husband Kyle again, but his license plate he drives a 911. He loves his Porsche, but his license plate is serve and volley. It's like an acronym, SRV, volley. And then when he met me, he's younger than me. So he's about 8.5 years younger than me. So he didn't really know me very well. He'd heard of me, from Florida tennis, but he didn't really know me. And so we get out on the court, and I'm just at the baseline. Like that's my, I love the baseline. Like I could, stay on the baseline forever. And so he said, "Oh my gosh, I've got to teach you to serve and volley. You're tall, like you'd be," and I was an adult at that point, but still to this day, he tries to teach me how to volley and get me to the net. But I feel most comfortable hitting from the baseline.
Well, you're very tall. I mean, standing next to Kyle, you don't look tall, but how tall are you?
Yeah. I'm 5'11".
5'11". Yeah. So with, with Kyle, he obviously has a very, as I said earlier, very impressive background. Have you ever thought about playing husband-wife? Any husband-wife doubles? No?
Well, I love my husband and he loves me. I just, I don't know. We haven't really done a whole lot of that. We'll get on the court. We have a court in our neighborhood, and he's actually my hitting partner. When I want to go out and play on his days off, and I love doing drills with him and all kinds of things. But we've only experienced one set on court together. And I'll just say this: it was challenging. I think he felt the pressure of playing with me, and I was like, "Oh, I've got to play well with him." And it was with another a friend of ours from the Florida 90s tennis group. I don't know if you've heard of them.
No,
Brian Rosenthal. But there's a group of juniors called the Florida 90s, and he started this group of tennis players who grew up in the 90s playing tennis and juniors, and it's a pretty big organization, a group now on Facebook, a couple hundred juniors now who've joined it.
Actually, now that you say that, Andres Barbosa has talked to me about that. Do you know that name, Andres Barbosa?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And so it's such an amazing group. But one day Brian Rosenthal was in town from North Carolina, and he plays all the time. And I just hadn't played a whole lot, and Kyle was on court teaching a lot. So he gets out there, and I thought we were just going to have a fun little, like, oh, let's just hit around. And all of a sudden we're in this set, it's like this competitive set. And I'm trying to poach, and Kyle's serving and volleying, and I'm like, oh, brother. So we didn't do very well. I think in retrospect, though, we had never played together. So it was just a new experience. But I think we would do well because our games would complement each other. Because I can hit, still from the baseline pretty well, and he could come to the net, right?
Right. Well, the late Jim Martz, who unfortunately passed away not too long ago, I'm sure with Love Serving Autism, you knew Jim. But Jim, you talked about writing a book just on Arthur Ashe quotes, and one of Arthur Ashe's quotes was "Never teach your spouse." So, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, Kyle. Again, I apologize. I talk about him a lot today. I mean, he's just a big part of my life. Obviously, he's my husband, and we'll be married 4 years coming up in March. But he's a coach. Like, he's truly a coach. Like, I was more a player. So he can, like you, Steve, you can analyze, and I just knew what it felt like to hit the ball. And I knew the second I hit it, if it was going in or out, I just had that instinct where Kyle can look at my game and tell me exactly why, if I need to improve my volley or my forehand, whatever it is. I just never really coached at that level.
Yeah.
So when we go out and hit sometimes, and if I feel I'm doing well, great. But if I'm like, Kyle, what do I need to improve on my volleys? And, and he'll tell me. And I think it's like insightful because Andy Brandi and some of the coaches growing up would give me like, strategies and techniques and tactics and all that. But I was more like kinesthetic. Like, I just knew what it felt like to hit the ball. And that's what I relied on. Because like when I visited you, Steve, and we were in Orlando, right?
Yeah.
When you were, I was so amazed at what the juniors could articulate through what they learned from you on court, with just preparation, lack of preparation, everything. And I never really had a coach who taught me all that. Like, I think coaches they recognized I had ability, natural ability, but I really never studied the game.
Mm-hmm.
So if something broke down, I just knew I had to fix it.
I know we're going to talk about Andy, a connection we have with Andy Brandi, but let's talk a little bit about going to Duke. So obviously you did well academically. Yeah, not anybody gets into Duke. How did you end up choosing Duke?
Well, I was contemplating because I was still in juniors, and I think I was like 2 in the country, so I was like determined. Like, Lindsay Davenport and I were like back and forth, right? And she was younger than me, but we both had these like strong baseline games. And I know she was turning pro, and I remember traveling with my mom to a tournament, and I thought, what do I do? Because I know, like, a part of me knows, like, oh, maybe I should go and play professionally. But then I thought, well, I go to St. Andrews, and it's important to do my schoolwork, and I was very into school. And so I was in a hotel room with my mom when the phone rang, and it was the Duke University coach, Jeff McDonald, at the time, who ended up going to Vanderbilt the next year. But Jeff called and said, Lisa, are you interested in going to Duke? And at the same time, I remember like a week before that, Andy Brandi had reached out and actually flew to our house in Boca and met us and said, we'd like to offer your daughter a scholarship. And it was just like tough to decide. I felt like a young kid. I didn't know what my future was going to be, and I just made the decision of, well, who would say no to Duke University, especially if you go to St. Andrews and everyone goes like Ivy League schools. So I felt like it was expected of me to say yes at that time, in retrospect. Mm-hmm. And I knew they had a top 4 team in the country for women's tennis. And, I said, maybe I'll give the college tennis try for a few years and then kind of see where I am with everything. So that's how I made the decision. It wasn't anything that I definitely like knew this is it for me. I just knew that it sounded like a great opportunity.
With Jeff, I've met Jeff a few times. I know he's retired now. I was told that he's teaching tennis in Nashville, and that he's actually looked at the curriculum. Our curriculum is a system of systems with different coaches. I know he was doing some writing for the New York Times. With
Wow.
I know we're going to come back to transferring. So, but we're at that time it's probably changed so much more. Were agencies talking to you about turning pro because of your rank so high, or?
A little bit, but it was no. I felt like I was more focused on. I'm not saying I felt pressure, but I wanted to please my parents. I wanted to please everyone, right? So I felt like I'd make them proud if I went to Duke. And I know just saying this out loud now that I'm older, but I felt like, oh, well, of course I've got to go to university first and then turn pro because academics have always been like number one. And I was the student in school where my parents, I'd say, you have to go to school and schedule a conference because I'm not doing well in school. And they come home and say, you have 1B, and all A's. But I would just get stressed over that. So I think in my mind, it wasn't even an option to turn pro. I just felt like it was the right thing to do to go to college first, and then I can do it after. Whereas Lindsay, I know she just transitioned, I think, right to professional at that age.
Right.
So I, went to Duke, and Jeff was there. We were both, it was my freshman year, and it was Jeff's first year at Duke, first and last, because he ended up transferring to Vanderbilt the next year.
Oh, okay.
I did not feel I felt like I grew up in a bubble, like a protected bubble of, okay, you're number one in the state, you're doing well in the country, you're training in tennis. And then I thought I'd go to Duke and everyone would be like, wow, the tennis team is so awesome. But I didn't realize it's a school focused on so much as basketball and Coach Krzyzewski that, the students would camp out all night at Duke and they weren't really that into tennis. Right. So I felt like it was like a total game changer because I was like, oh my gosh, I come from Florida where my identity was winning in tennis and people knew me from tennis. And then I go to Duke and no one really cares or knows you. That's how I felt at the time. Right.
No, it sounds similar to one of our guests just a couple of weeks ago, Sophia Patel, who we've worked with. She was looking at some of the Ivy League schools and she was positive, but she just felt like it was all about academics and not about, tennis and academics. I know. Go ahead.
Everyone in my dorm room, it was a co-ed dorm room, but what I was getting to was I did not have the life skills. So you grow up in this tennis bubble and, you're training, and I didn't really have a social life. And because all I did was travel and go to tournaments. I started at Duke, and then I had to live in a co-ed dorm. I had to do my own laundry, all these that are like, oh my gosh, I did not have the life skills. No one really taught me or prepared me for that transition. Because I just didn't know anything else other than tennis. So it was a tough year for me, even though we did well in the team, which is one of the reasons I transferred, because I wanted to be closer to my family.
Okay. Yeah. We'll come back to that. That's, leaving Florida and Andy Brandi to the end of the podcast, the interview.
Sure.
Talk to us about pro tennis.
Mm-hmm. Well, pro tennis really didn't start till after UF.
Right.
Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah.
So I graduated from UF in '96, and the team won NCAA championships, and I think I was top 25 in the country. In I don't really know my ranking; it was a while ago, but I was doing decently well in singles. But I started traveling the circuits, and I had to get a world ranking, and I really never took a break. I just went straight from juniors to college to pro. And so at the time, I did have a few herniated discs in my back, but I had the epidurals, to treat them, because it was just a lot of training nonstop. And I started doing decently well on the circuit. Honestly, I don't even know if it's on the computer. If I could search my world ranking, I mean, I'd played players in the 200s and 300s and won, but I just kind of started to question my purpose at that time. I felt like physically, I felt gifted that I could. I mean, I grew up with Lindsay, some of these players, Mary Pierce, like I saw them top 50, top 10, right? And I was like, oh, well, maybe someday I'll do that if I can. But I started kind of questioning at that time, do I want to, is this the life for me? Because, when you're building a world ranking and you're not already in the top 50, you're traveling tournament, you're playing the qualifiers and you're playing the same players over and over and over. And I had to play Don Booth and Stephanie Nikitas and some of my teammates, which was really awkward because we were on the same team together, and now we're competing against each other on the circuit in the pro tour. So I wasn't like in love with the concept of like, this is my career. Even though in retrospect, I don't really feel like I truly reached my potential in tennis. I do feel that I'm still in tennis for a different reason now, but I felt like I gave it my all at the time. And I did end up getting back surgery a couple of years into traveling and doing some of the professional tournaments. I had spinal stenosis, so the doctor's like, oh, we'll operate. This is in Miami. You have a narrow spine. It does look a lot of inflammation. So he basically operated and said, you can go back and compete. But at the time, and I'm just going to be honest, I felt like maybe this is my chance to take a break, a mental break, and kind of reassess where I am. Do I really want to push my body and keep doing this for my career? And I didn't really love being in the spotlight, playing on center court and all that. For some reason, it just wasn't like I didn't love it. I didn't love all the attention, even in the junior Grand Slams. Like I played Junior US Open, and I think I got to the round of 16, and I was playing Magdalena Maleva, and she, was on one of the front courts. And I just remember you really have to love this to be here, right? Like to be in the center of all this, the spotlight all the time. So I was young, I think I was trying to handle all the pressure and process everything. And I took a break after my back surgery in my early 20s after playing, professionally for a little while.
And then grad school. Where did you go to grad school?
Well, my parents lived in Boca Still, so I taught briefly at, actually I was a hitting partner at the Everett Academy. So John Everett and Chris Everett were there, and I started just getting back on court and training with juniors. But I thought, oh my gosh, I'm back again. It's like 10-hour days on court. So and then FAU offered me a women's assistant coach position to coach the women's FAU tennis team. I briefly did that. Wasn't in love with coaching college tennis, especially females who were pretty close to my age. So I went to grad school at FAU, and I really didn't have a major. I ended up becoming a speech-language pathologist, but my degree at UF was linguistics. So I had to really take all the prerequisites and start from scratch.
And that was
to get into grad school.
So that was what, a 3-year period?
It's a 3-year. It's a graduate school for speech and language pathology is a 3-year program, and they actually sat me down and said, the professor sat me down in a room and said, you're not going to be able to coach at FAU and also participate in they're very academic, focused. They're like, you have to make a choice. Either you're going to be a coach or you're going to go to school. So I decided to do the graduate school program. And
then that has ended up where you ended up combining education and tennis. But why don't you tell us about your progression as a school teacher or a specialist, and then how that ended up where you are now with Love Serving Autism.
Sure. So I graduated from FAU with my master's degree, and I decided to some of my internships during grad school were with children, pediatrics. And I met my first child with autism in Belglade, Florida at a daycare center, which I don't know if you know where Belglade is.
Yeah.
Kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so I would go out there, and my parents would think, oh my gosh, is that safe to go all the way out there? It was like 45-minute drive, and I was just doing my internship out there, and I met this boy named Katavius McKissick. I remember him. and he had autism. And I thought, wow, he's pretty fascinating. He doesn't nap during nap time. All the kids are napping. He's running in circles. I'm like, wow, like, I want to learn about this. So that's kind of where it all began. But at that time, they didn't really know a whole lot about autism like they do today. That was over 20 years ago. But I started at that point, and then my first job was in a classroom in Wellington, Florida, for the Palm Beach County School District as a speech therapist in an autism unit. So the principal walked me back and said, we have a job opening for you, but it isn't an autism classroom. And he goes, let me give you a tour of this classroom. And I actually loved it. He was surprised I took the job because he thought it was just, it's not, in his mind, he didn't think it was an easy position, to do something like that as a young therapist. So that's where it began. My classroom experience began in a school as a speech therapist. And I really wasn't playing tennis at all. And I have to say, it was like kind of nice. It was like a new identity for me, even though I know tennis had been a huge part of my life. And it may sound silly, but it was kind of nice to be someone different for a little while and feel like people like me because I'm helping others versus my achievements, my results. I felt like growing up in tennis in Florida, it was so result oriented. And as a junior, everyone feels so happy for you when you win. And my parents are wonderful people. So they weren't like the hardcore tennis parents, but I wanted to make them happy. So it was kind of a relief going to grad school and being in an industry where you're helping other people. You're not like focused on yourself.
Well, to become a high level tennis player like you did, I mean, it's like there's two things in life. It's at that point you're doing your academic work and your extracurricular pursuit is tennis and more tennis.
Yes.
It's, I think that's unfortunate about tennis. I mean, obviously it's such a demanding sport. It's so technical. And I was telling someone the other day, if I was a football player, obviously I'm half the size of Kyle. If I was playing big time college football, the only thing I could do is be the place kick holder. And it's like, maybe I could get that down. All I got to do is catch the ball, spin the ball, get the strings facing the other way, tilt the ball back. And, but to be a tennis player, it's a different learning curve. So yeah, it does require so much time.
It does. Mm-hmm.
So, but you were a school teacher or a specialist with the public school system for 10 years?
For 10 years, and then I started working at the Palm Beach School for Autism. So for 10 years, I was at one school as a speech therapist, and then I said, I really like working with the autism population. I'm going to take a full-time job at a charter school for autism with like over 300 children diagnosed. It's in South Florida. It's one of the biggest schools for autism in the United States. So I said, I'd love to work here. And I knew the executive director at the time. I used to work with her son too. So I took the job there like 10 years into my speech therapy career. And I stayed there for 5 years. And that's actually where I started Love Serving Autism, the tennis program. I go ahead.
I was going to say with autism, and Yvonne could jump in here and ask me some questions. But for our listeners, all you have to do is, you could do it in anything and everything these days, is just Google and YouTube. There's several podcasts. There's a couple of promotional pieces. It's very easy to find out about what you're doing. But tell us a little bit about just autism in general.
Sure. Well, when I started in the field of autism, and I didn't learn anything in grad school about it, there were very few courses on it. I just knew it existed. And at the time, there was not as much inclusion. So, now obviously the numbers are, the statistics and the prevalence of autism is very high. Autism is really, it affects, it's like a neurodegenerative, it's kind of like with the mind, you're wired differently. So you're wired differently with your communication skills and your motor coordination skills and your behavior skills. And so a lot of these like neurological disorders, they call them, pardon me, but I don't love the word disorder, but it just affects the way they interact with other people. So as a speech therapist, we would come in and help them with these social skills, expressive language skills, and help them be able to communicate. And there's all levels on the spectrum. So there are children who are very high functioning. I'd say they call it level 1 now, autistic. And these are children and adults who are very social. But if you put them in a job setting, they may not have appropriate communication skills as far as like a filter. They may tell you exactly what they're thinking, right? And so they don't, oftentimes, not always easy for them to fit in the workplace. And then we do have players in our program who are minimally verbal or nonverbal, and that means that they just have something called speech apraxia. And apraxia of the brain is really the wiring of the brain. So they may know what they want to say, they just might not be able to articulate it. So it's a big mix on the spectrum. A lot of people or a lot of children are now diagnosed. I think 1 in 36 are now diagnosed by the age of 8. And 1 in 6 children in the U.S. have a developmental delay of some sort, by the way. That's another statistic. So a lot of coaches in tennis are encountering these children with delays in their programs. On top of that, children with autism, it's they're either typically in a more of a self-contained programs, or their parents. Some parents try the inclusive model where they try to get them involved with typical peers. But it's a broad spectrum, and it affects everyone differently, and every individual is different.
With the range being from mild to severe, as far as does that fluctuate? Or is it's certainly not locked in? I mean, as far as lifelong effects.
Well, I do know a woman. I know a couple people. One of my good friends, her son was nonverbal when he was little, and she immersed him in therapies, speech therapy, occupational therapy, ABA, which is applied behavioral analysis. So he did all the behavioral therapies, 40 hours a week. I mean, her whole life was her son in therapies, and he just is now attending Palm Beach State College. And he's verbal and he's social and he has a lot of friends. And so he made somehow and he was able to make that leap from not having language to the therapies totally worked. And now he's pretty independent and can drive and do all that. But then there are some children who go through all the therapies, but they never fully gain that level of independence. And I don't know why. I wish I did. Because parents obviously want to give their child the best life and they want to give them all the tools and resources possible. But for some, they just pick up on the language skills faster than others. So there really isn't a cure for it. I think my mentality is to focus on the strengths more than it being a disability. So I see it as like they have unique abilities, but they're not like disabled. And that's kind of what I've learned through tennis. Especially some of the stories I have, which we can talk about in a minute, but just seeing them excel on the tennis court, who you never thought a child who's nonverbal can hit a tennis ball, right? But I've seen it. So
I think of the late Vic Braden. He was ABD, all but dissertation, and what he wanted to do to finalize his PhD was to prove that you could help a child more on the playground, more the court, the field, and he was turned down. And from that point, he pretty much turned his back on academia. And he had a TV show called Vic's Vacant Lot, and it was, about how you could help someone with what you're doing through fresh air and outside and activity. What happened during COVID?
Well, okay, so I started Love Serving Autism, which is a nonprofit organization, in 2017, and I was working as a speech therapist at the same school, at the Palm Beach School for Autism. So I spoke to the executive director, and I said, may I start a tennis program? And she said, sure, it sounds fantastic. I did have a few years working with Acing Autism. They're based in California, and I knew the founder at the time, and they were the only nonprofit at the time who really taught tennis, right? And I helped him expand into Florida before I said, I think I need to, I see a new vision for this program. I want it to be more therapeutic in nature and more focused on speech therapy and what I learned in the classroom. And at the time, they weren't really able to embrace my vision. So it was fine. I just started my own program, and I started at the school where I was working. and we're 20 children. There were 20 children in this program, and yeah, I mean, I think that the program progressed, and then when we started at one school, and then another director called, "Hey, Lisa, I heard what you're doing at the public school for autism. We need a program like that." And then another school called, and then a public tennis center, like directors would call and say, "We want to be inclusive at our facility. How do we host a program like this in our facility? How do we get training?" So it kind of started to grow, and starting in 2017, I'm 7 years into the organization now. But during the pandemic, you're going to laugh, but I decided that we needed to stay connected to the families. So I started teaching on Zoom, and families would log in from their computer, and they'd all have their tennis rackets, and we would improvise and do all the hand-eye coordination, the fitness, and it was like an hour-long Zoom class.
Whoa.
And that went on. And then an organization in Canada found out about it, ProSet Autism, and he called me and said, "Can our families join your Zoom?" So then we had Canadians logging in, from all over the place. So we were doing Zoom tennis indoors in our home for about 2 years. Yes, I didn't break anything, thankfully. And Kyle was like, "Don't break the paintings," and but we were hitting a little on the wall a little bit.
But with expansion, how many sites are you at now? Is it just in Florida, or are you outside of Florida?
Well, we have about 35 locations in Florida, and then about 13 additional states outside of Florida. So I'd say about 14 states right now. So it definitely has grown, and Kyle can tell you, we have international requests too, but there's just a lack of training and education for coaches in this area of expertise. So, this week I had a college student from Morocco contact me and said she wants to do a project for her university on tennis for children with autism. And she said, "We don't have resources in Morocco for this. Like, how do we learn?" So there's it's just a huge need for it, which is great, I guess, in many ways, but it's a bit challenging to keep up with the pace of the programming requests, because so many families are struggling with raising their children, and they want these recreational resources, there's recreational opportunities. And if a child with autism were just to go to like a tennis center, a lot of coaches wouldn't know what to do, so they end up wanting to take these specialized classes. And so that's kind of how it's grown so quickly.
That's fantastic. And Kyle, who's so many different awards and so many, he's been honored. He's been with USPTA and all this and that, and needs a pat on the back. But he's leaving the Oaks, where he's been for 20 years. And tell us a little about that. He's going to work with you.
Yeah. So Kyle, yes, you're right. He's a USPTA Master Pro. He's accomplished a lot in the industry. He's only 41 years old. He's very he's a student of the game. He's a fantastic coach, and he, after 19 years at the Oaks, decided he really wants to mentor coaches and work with Love Serving. He has Sets Consulting, which is a business, right? And it's a consultant business for coaches in the industry. And Love Serving Autism is one of his clients. And so what we're doing is we're applying for a grant. I believe it's a $75,000 grant. We are in the final stage, so hopefully we get it. Kyle would help us build certification programs for coaches. So, let's just say a coach in Michigan wants to learn how to teach tennis to children with autism. We would actually have a certification program for the coaches. So it's a work. I mean, I have the outline of it, but next step would be for him to help kind of build it out and design it for us.
Well, for our listeners,
I'm really excited about that.
No, that's great. For our listeners, Kyle, I met him many, many years ago. He went to Ferris State, which is one of the few programs where you get a degree. So he has a professional tennis management degree. He also has degrees from Michigan and Stanford. So he has the academic background, but also the clinical background.
Yeah.
Tell us a few more things. Go ahead.
And he does help us on court. We just finished the Delray Beach Open clinic for Love Serving Autism. So during the tournament, some of the ATP and WTA tournaments will invite us to bring our children out, or adults, and we host like these 1 hour classes. So the Delray Beach Open is one of our on-court events. We do it annually, and then the tournament gives complimentary passes or tickets to the family members, and they can stay and watch the Bryan brothers and all the, during the Delray Open, all the players play. And then the Miami Open is next. So we have an on-court clinic on March 19th, and Kyle will be one of the on-court coaches for that. It's again about the tournaments being inclusive. And then the U.S. Open, we've been invited 3 times to the U.S. Open, and we've had on-court events at the U.S. Open, and he helped me as one of the on-court coaches as well.
Oh, that's great. Tell us about how people can find out more about your foundation and
Sure.
Volunteers, the screening process, a donating page. Go ahead.
Sure. So our website is loveservingautism.org. And I'm personally located in South Florida, but if you wanted to get involved and we have a program in your area, you can go to our website and find the volunteer tab. And there's a quick volunteer registration and a screening form that you fill out. And you really don't need a whole lot of experience to volunteer. It just, you learn as you go, and the coaches are great. They're all trained on how to work with this group. As far as donations, we do have an annual gala every year. We have a page specifically for fundraising, and you can donate on our website, which obviously helps us and helps our scholarships for our families. And we have, a lot of I'd say 40% of the families are on scholarships. We don't charge a whole lot for tennis. It's usually like $15 for a 1-hour class, because we pay our coaches, but a lot of the families are on scholarships. So we do fundraising throughout the year.
No, that's fantastic. I know you're pressed for time. And Andy Brandi. Let's go back to Andy Brandi. It's unfortunate. Sure. Tell us about transferring to the University of Florida. You did tell us already that Andy came to your house, but tell us about Andy Brandi.
Well,
amazing.
I just knew, yes. I don't even know where to begin, but I just knew that my freshman year was a big learning year for me. It was something where I was a little homesick. Again, we had a very strong tennis team, and I did okay. I did well, but I just thought, well, I really want to move closer to home. And I remember NCAA my freshman year was in Gainesville, and I was in the van with like all the Duke players, and they're like, oh gosh, look, we're in Gainesville, guys. They almost they're like, oh, we like being in North Carolina better. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, little do they know that I'm transferring here next year, because I already had spoken to Andy about it, but it wasn't like officially announced. And so Andy sat me in his office with my mother, and I was like shaking. I was really nervous. And he said to me, if you're going to transfer here, you got to do things my way, and this is how it's going to be run. And I really needed the structure at that time, because I really needed to you're young and you need to follow rules. And I felt like, yeah, he's really going to be strict with me, and that's probably good for me. And my mom looked at me and said, are you listening? You hear what he said, right? And I said, yes, ma'am, I hear what he said. I will listen to him. I will do what he says as a coach. And it was a bit intimidating, at the time, going into his office and sitting there. And I think Jill Krabis and Lorianne Friedman's another player, but we were all transferring from different schools the same year. So I just knew he meant business, and I was going to have to perform. It wasn't an option to not do well. But I think it's what I needed at the time.
With your teammates, who was on the team with you? You mentioned a couple of players already. Yes.
Well, I was on the team with Jill Krabis, Dawn Booth, Stephanie Nikitas. One of my best friends was from Norway. She didn't play a whole lot on the team, but Katrina Instabo. Divya Merchant was another one. Lorianne Friedman. Lisa Raymond was there during my recruiting trip, but she transferred on the tour like a few months later. So when I would take private, during the school day would consist of morning practice and go to school. And then periodically during lunch break, I'd have a private lesson with Andy. And I remember Andy, we had payphones back then. So Andy would always, leave the court and go take the payphone call for Lisa and talk to her because she'd call from her tournaments. And I'd sit there like, can we move along here? I'm waiting on the court. But I remember like he loved getting calls from Lisa Raymond. But yeah, he meant business. Like the second you stepped on the court, it was expected of us, which I really respect about him. Not all my teammates really like that about it because they felt like it was a bit much. But to me, I think it really kept me in line and I was always disciplined, but it really kept me like performing well, because I didn't want to let him down.
Was Kathy Rinaldi? I mean, she was a touring pro, but I know she was based on campus. Was she there when you were there?
No, she wasn't really around a whole lot. Joanne Russell, if you know her name.
Yep. Sujay Lama,
She came around. Sujay Lama was our assistant coach, and Joanne Russell would come out quite often. And, she was like part of our team, hit with us, things like that. But Andy just, I think, I'm not saying it was like a scare tactic, whatever, but he just knew like the second you got on court, it was like, okay, you're performing today. And even when teams would travel in, when you had SCCs at Gainesville, I remember like them just like coming out of the vans and looking at us and watching us practice, and they're just staring at us like, oh my gosh, like look how intense their practices are. Like it was just,
it's amazing how successful he was. Yvonne, just want to take a minute and just read that. I think this should put Andy Brandi in the International Tennis Hall of Fame. I think it's kind of sad that the International Tennis Hall of Fame is just so much around pro tennis. It doesn't really reach out to the grassroots levels and such. But read this, Yvonne.
Yeah, of course. Andy Brandi led the Gators to 3 NCAA national titles, 92, 96, 98, and to 6 national team indoor championships, 89, 91, 92, 96, 98, and 99. He also guided the Florida women to 14 Southeastern Conference titles in his 17 seasons. Brandi, a 2006 Gator great and inductee into the UF Athletics Hall of Fame, was the first Florida coach to lead one program to 3 NCAA titles. His win-loss record at University of Florida was an astounding 460-43, a winning percentage of 91%, including 196-6, and in the Southeastern Conference dual matches, winning percentage of 97%. His championships, notables here's NCAA, like I mentioned, 92, 96, 98. Southeastern Conference is 85, 86, 87, 88, 90, 91, 92, 93, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, and 2001. And the Southeastern Conference tournament was won in 90, 91, 92, 93, 95, 96, 97, 98, 2000. His awards are Southeastern Conference Coach of the Year in 87, 88, 93, 96, and 98. USPTA National Coach of the Year in 88. USPTR National Coach of the Year in 96 and 98. ITA National Coach of the Year in the year of 89 and 96. And he's the University of Florida Athletic Hall of Famer.
With because of your connection being a former a team member, first person I hear, I got a text from Kyle, and I was just like, whoa. I mean, I think of Andy Brandi. I wrote a tribute that he was like a clock. He just never stopped. He kept on going.
Right.
If I had to make a list of people who are going to live to be 100, I would have thought of Andy Brandi as one of them. But yeah, not too long ago, less than a year ago, I saw him at the Battle of Boca, which is that standing tournament, with, I guess, so many different questions. You're so sweet and altruistic with what you're doing. People can just tell. Again, you need to look up Lisa online. I think of Nancy Brandi being the same way. I always used to tell people, well, yeah, Andy beat Jimmy Connors twice in the 12s, but the best match he ever won was Nancy Brandi. But what was it like for you? I mean, Andy, I have some stories of this, that, and the other thing, because I worked for Andy. He was 24, I was 22, and I could tell all sorts of stories about intensity. But just tell us a few things, like why such an impressive record?
Well, I mean, he wasn't like a super big, tall guy, right? I just know he was just mighty. Like he was just small and mighty, and like he would come out. I think at the time when we were at UF, he was taking these Taekwondo classes, and he was all into like Taekwondo and discipline, and he just was very just direct. This is what we're doing today, and this is how you're going to do it. And one time I rebelled, which I can't believe I did this in retrospect, but he told Jill Kravis, okay, it was the fall season and this was before the team season. So he'd say individual tournament. He put Jill in like flight A for this tournament and I was in flight B. And I said, well, I'm not going if I'm in flight B. Like he would just do what kind of he wanted because everyone would like listen. And I said, well, I'm not playing in flight B, whatever reasoning. And I didn't get on the bus. And I was in my dorm room and my roommate was a college runner. And she's like, you're not on the bus. Your team's like going off to a tournament. I said, well, I told Andy I'm not getting on that bus if I'm not playing in flight A. And my teammates called me. I think it was like Stephanie Nikitas. And she's like, you better get on this bus. So I thought, oh my gosh, my parents are going to kill me. Like I may lose my scholarship over this. And they left for the tournament. They came home. And Andy sat me down and he had a big grin on his face. He's like, Lisa, he's like, I'm kind of impressed with what you did. He's like, you stood up for yourself, and I was like, oh, I can't believe I did that to Andy Brandi, right? But I was just determined to prove like I'm going to show him what I'm capable of. And I think he admired that. Like he admired the players who are strong mentally. And there were tournaments and matches where, I just knew his presence. Like you play in a team competition and you just felt like he was always watching you, always behind you. And I knew I wanted to perform to please him. I don't know the magical answer of like why. I think I just knew that he expected the best, kind of like my father too. My father is that way. He's a business leader and a strong man. And I just always wanted to do well, so he just kind of brought that out of us as a team. Maybe some call it pressure, I don't know, but I didn't perceive it as that. I just knew like, you don't mess around. You show up to practices. If you're a minute late, you're running a mile, and all the team's going to run a mile with you. And he just knew how to bring out the best in us. And I think that's why we excelled. And my junior year, I think I had mentioned to you on a previous call, but we were like one set away from winning the tournament NCAAs. So we were in the finals of NCAAs, and so the senior year, we're like, we're doing it this year. We have to win, And we were down against Stanford in the finals in Tallahassee, and we came back and won. And I'm like, thank goodness, It was the best moment for us to do it. But and Sujay was great too. I still am friends with him. But I have to say with Andy, since as an adult and when I started Love Serving Autism, he became so encouraging to me. He would reach out on social media or message me and say, I'm really proud of you. He was always like applauding, any efforts to help people, especially the children. And like, I just always knew if something was posted on social media that he would like it and he was commenting. And I thought that meant a lot. Like he was taking the time to do that.
Yeah, no, it takes time. I mean, I believe he started in '84. It was '92 before they won, right? Can you see that on that sheet, Yvonne?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I think so. Kristen Osman was on that team, I think.
I was based in Tampa, Florida for 15 years, and I can't tell you how many times I took players to the University of Florida to watch matches. I mean, I tell a story about this young kid from Dusseldorf. I said, yeah, we're going to go to Gainesville. And I actually just took him up and back in one day and, talked to his parents about, just being on a college campus. And I said, we're going to go to Gainesville and their football stadium is going to be bigger than any stadium in Dusseldorf. And he said, no way. And of course, what do they call it? The Swamp, where you can actually go into the stadium. It's open and you walk up and down the stairs. And, but Andy Jackson, who was coaching the men's team when Andy was there, I remember him telling me that not only Andy Jackson, but the men's team were really in awe or kind of even intimidated by how hard the women's team worked.
Yes, 100%. Yes, they would stay and watch our matches, and they were like, wow, even the football team would come and watch us. Like Andy talked to Steve Spurrier, and like if the if the players weren't doing well academically, the football team would come and sit, and they were mandated to watch our tennis matches. Because I look up at the stands and I'm like, whoa, what's the football players doing here? But
I would say that the phrase you hear quite often is I did a deep dive, reading about you and your mission with autism. But I did the same thing with Andy. The former athletic director Jeremy Foley said that he went to the track one time and Andy was running behind you. And I remember working with him back when he was, again, 24, I was 22, he ran every day. And he was behind the girls on the track and just screaming, "Don't you dare let me catch up with you."
Yep. He did.
He'd give you a head start with
we would do the sleds, you'd pull those sleds. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah.
And that was another workout. I mean, he had us doing all kinds of, but yeah, he didn't mess around. Like, we were training. We were there to train. And
one time I was at the NCAAs every day when they won it at Notre Dame. Another time, actually, I'm going to guess, we have a fact checker that Lisa Raymond lost, I think, 2 matches, but it's interesting, Andy, maybe you took the team up to see the mountains in Utah, but the team played BYU and the University of Utah, and I was doing some things for the Utah Tennis Association, and so I spent some time and went to the BYU match and the Utah match, and no, it was half a bagel with Andy. I was told that the word, now, I mean, I would think that when he spent a few years at LSU, get myself in trouble here, but the FU, Florida University of Florida women, the Gators versus the Tigers, the Gator ladies, you being one of them, and then the Tigers that he was coaching with his son Chris. That I'm going to guess that the women were much tougher than the men because of the era, because of the time.
Yes.
But yeah, the athletic director, he did say that Steve Spurrier stopped practice one time and just made everybody go over watch the women practice.
Yes. And our team recently met together. It was our 25-year, something like that, reunion in Gainesville. Andy was not able to go because he was going through, I think, his treatments at the time for cancer.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't able to go, but he messaged me and said, I hope to come again, see you guys again soon. And he really loved our team because we just bonded, and it was a phenomenal few years. But and Sujay, I know he's still on court coaching, but I think we'll all miss Andy. We'll miss his presence more than anything because we just knew he was one of those bigger than life kind of personalities, and I always wanted to please him, as a player, and even with Love Serving Autism, oh, Andy would be so proud of me, And I was really disheartened when I heard about it. I was really surprised, and I know he was teaching at Ivis Country Club right up until he passed.
Yeah, I was told that he was working 3 days a week, and that even perhaps a day before. For our listeners, Sujay Lama has been a guest on our podcast, and he talked quite a bit about his time with Andy. I would encourage people to do that. I've written quite a few things up. I know you have to go here in a minute, but I can actually read those off as part of the podcast. With that expression, when you win a national championship like that, walk together forever. With the players that you played with. That's just something that you can never forget when you work so hard. Of course, I mean, I just think you go back to your garage, or the listeners. That's a great idea for your parents to paint that garage green. And I love backboards. That's how Andy told me about you and your cause. I remember your name. I obviously was present watching you play. It's not like I would have a recall for. You just met the NCAAs and watching people play, but I just today from Belgium, I saw a new backboard. Within the first year when we brought that backboard back, it was called Tennis Mate. It was discontinued. I used to, make it mandatory. I understand that one time the French Tennis Federation and the Swedish Tennis Federation made the portable backboard mandatory, but within 1 year there was six backboards made here in the States. And as I said, I just saw one in Belgium today. With kids with autism, they got to, for the most part, don't they thrive on doing something that's very repetitive? I know you can't put someone in a box, but
yes, I think so. And like, you and I have spoken about backboards. I think the challenge has been really like a lot of these children who come to our programs, they'll go to a tennis center, or now pickleball is being introduced to, but okay, we'll focus on tennis, but they're going to tennis center. They play for an hour. Most of the parents are not tennis players. And I always encourage them, like even in Patrick Park in Boca, they had all these like hitting walls. And I thought, oh my gosh, like if you want your child to practice more, bring them midweek to one of these walls, have them practice. And I think that some of the parents did it, but it wasn't enough. I feel like they just do the 1 hour a week. They play on court with their coaches and they leave, and then they come back the next week. I just knew that the wall was something, and they also liked the ball machine because Stan Oli donated a ball machine to us, and I brought it out one day to one of the programs, and I turned it on, and they're like, "Wow, this is amazing!" The balls would shoot out, and they love the ball machine. So I want to incorporate more of that into our programming. But like when I was young, I wasn't into dolls. My mom tried all the doll houses and the doll. Like all I wanted to do was sit on the wall. So
no, that's great. I mean, I don't think there's a champion who hasn't hit endless hours on a backboard. With kids helping kids, I've been in junior tennis now for 50 years. Starting as a volunteer, and the years go by. It'd be great if, I know kids have to spend so much time on their own game. I think that actually today kids get more attention than they did before, and I think that's actually a bad thing. But I think if kids could help work as volunteers as well. Tell us about your volunteer forces. I was
going to say that. So back when I was competing in junior tennis, I was so focused on competing, winning results. That was my identity. And, I really wasn't focused on anything else. And even in college, I don't remember ever volunteering. I know Ben Shelton's dad, who was the coach for UF for a while, was very into his team volunteering after matches or, when they weren't competing. Like Ben's volunteered too. But because we have a Love Serving Autism program in Gainesville, and I did reach out to Ben's father, and his father said, we'd love to get involved. And that was like right before Ben went on tour. So we didn't really have a chance for him to get on court with our program. But I wish I had been more involved in the community when I was younger, because I think it would have helped my tennis game. I think it would have given me a perspective on this is a tennis match, right? But like there's more to life off court than results and winning tennis matches. And now we do have junior players and college players volunteering, and I encourage them to. We have college teams volunteering too when they're not in season, which is great. I think it's great for them. They're more well-rounded that way. When I feel like they're helping others and they're seeing, oh, well, my life really isn't that bad. I mean, there's someone who struggles maybe more than me, and they can't speak, they can't communicate, and I could use the sport of tennis to help them.
And so 100%, 100%. With Andy, and I'll follow up with that.
Sure.
We were both young, and I was, there's no one who's just the best. I mean, but I was okay. Vic Braden, Vic Braden's the best, and Andy, Welby Van Horn's the best. His childhood mentor. So I ended up working for Welby. Phil Eisenberg, who this has been on some of our podcasts. Welby had to take a phone call, and he had like a 10-year-old who was sitting courtside. He said, "Hey, why don't you teach this gentleman?" It was Phil Eisenberg, and Phil Eisenberg said, Welby needs to be running a camp. So that's where Welby went from just teaching junior lessons to having a summer camp. He was in Puerto Rico for his entire career, basically. But Phil had a slogan, learn tennis you'll never forget. Welby's balance system and checkpoints. And, I do think that, if you just use the word coaching, it's kind of a tongue twister, but I would say that for the most part, how's it go? Developed players. Many people they're doing that. We're developing players, but then there's developed players. So obviously for yourself, like when you went to Duke and then Florida, that's what was taking place. With everything the players helped you or the coaches helped you at that level is that they're, again, tongue twister, they're developing developed players. But, another way to say it is we need more first base coaches. And another line we use all the time is the theme is the highest form of retention for learning is to teach. But it'd be great if we could connect some way with what we do with, we call it GreatBase Tennis. As the expression is, who can argue with a great base? But when you think about elite juniors, and I always tease people, tell me they're a high performance coach, and I stick my hand out, and say, "Hi, I'm Steve. I'm a low performance coach." And I think that in tennis we need more first base coaches. But no, I'd love to talk to you again. I mean, amazing tennis background. I'd love the story about the garage. That's amazing.
Thank you. And I'm happy that I'm still in the sport, for a different purpose. Like tennis truly is a lifelong sport. I never envisioned I'd be in the sport for this reason, but it's actually bringing me more fulfillment than when I was number one in the state or country, like top in the country. I feel I'm accomplishing more now as a person. But I know that on paper it sounds, oh, great, you're winning, millions of dollars in pros. That's great. But I don't know. I just feel like this is more my calling. And so I'm really thankful. And I met Kyle through it because I presented for Love Serving Autism at a USPTA conference. And Trish Faulkner, who's one of the pros of the USPTA, connected us just to talk about certifying a young man with autism to become a USPTA pro. Kyle tested him and I helped him as well. And that's how we met is through. So, I guess things happen for reasons.
No, it's great. No, I will, in the write-up, Yvonne will help out. We'll put down your website, and hopefully people can, if they can't donate dollars, they can donate time and get connected.
Thank you so much. Okay.
No, it's really us thanking you. But let's do this another time. But thank you so much for being a guest, Lisa.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for this opportunity. I hear my puppy in the background. It's so cute. But I really, it meant a lot for me to be able to share my story. And I will miss Andy Brandi a lot. Even Jim Martz, his nephew was on the autism spectrum. So we do have a memorial page on our website for Jim Martz Memorial Scholarship Fund. And I'm actually speaking at his, I was invited to speak at his celebration of life in a few weeks.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which will be in Plantation.
Yeah, I saw that. We're doing, I'd like to go to that. We're doing a workshop at UNC Charlotte. But actually with Jim, he always loved Vic Braden. I mean, how could you not love Vic Braden if you got to meet him, his personality? But we helped Jim with several hardship case students, even ones that lived with us 24/7. And, through our video work, then I mean, years ago, I remember writing a column for Jim, but, through some of the people that he reached out and helped, and then we were in a position where we, could help somebody 24/7 with housing and school and such. And, what a great guy. But
he's amazing. Every year he'd meet me at the Delray Open and he'd come watch our Love Serving Autism clinic.
Yeah.
And he'd take pictures and we do articles, and he would tell me all about his nephew AJ, who's on the spectrum, and I just loved him. So I was really sad. I mean, and then Andy Brandi. So it's it was sad.
Yeah.
Because they meant a lot to me and a lot of us. So.
Yeah. So Jim Martz and Andy Brandi, rest in peace.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
But thanks all you're doing for tennis.
Thank you.
It's a home run. It's a
thank you, Steve.
Fantastic effort.
Thank you. Right. I always wanted to do this with you, and so this is so exciting for me. And thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity.
Yeah, and let's connect with tennis education. I know Kyle's that's up his alley, and that's what we're trying to do. We give out free educational content on a regular basis.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah, Lisa, I also wanted to thank you as well. I don't have much exposure with kids with autism, opposed to this one class I took actually in high school where it was an art class, and assigned seating. I got sat next to this one kid, Robert, and he had autism, and we got along quite well because I was into Rubik's cubes at that time, and he was a big fan of my Rubik's cube, so much so that his mom bought one for him, and we were just cubing
Gosh.
together. And it was an
Wow.
art class, and it was just unbelievable to me because I remember we'd get an assignment, a project. Okay, you have to draw this or whatever,
Mhm.
and he wanted to be on his Rubik's cube so badly. He was so good. He was so invested in it that he'd,
Mhm.
I mean, finish this art project that took us weeks in like a day, like in the class. He just and he just did it, and he was back into Rubik's cubes, and
Rubik's Cube.
it was
Uh-huh.
amazing, like how fast and I mean,
Yeah.
very focused. And one thing
Yes.
is the teacher had, I remember, and this was a huge lesson for me in my life, where the teacher was unbelievably patient. Like the amount of patience it took
Mhm.
to just stick with him, and it was just so amazing to watch every day. Like
Mhm.
I sat next to him the whole semester, and I enjoyed it. And so I just wanted to tremendous
Oh.
respect to you, and thank you
Yeah.
for spending time and creating an organization and helping people with autism. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for sharing your story and for being kind to him because I'm sure it meant a lot to him, you know?
No, that's
So,
great. Yeah, Robert was his
yeah,
name. Yeah.
Robert. Oh, yeah. Well, anytime, Steve, if you want to, we can do a chat another time as well. I would love the opportunity. And, like, I wish you guys both the best wishes this year.
No, for sure.
And thank
Yeah,
you.
I'll follow up.
Mhm.
We're planning on doing
Okay.
workshops, and I certainly have a lot of connections in South Florida. But yeah,
Mhm.
let's talk
Yeah.
again. Let's reconnect, and
Okay.
it's all about trying to help people in tennis.
Thank you.
All right.
Absolutely. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
All right. Duke and Daisy, Kyle,
Yes, I'll go
Lisa.
see Duke and Daisy. All
Yeah.
right.
All right. All the
Have a
best.
good
All right.
weekend.
You too.
Thanks,
Okay.
Lisa.
All right.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye.
Wow, that was fantastic. I know that she had to go. It usually with our podcast we start with baby food,
Mhm.
but what are a few takeaways for you for that? I mean, I'll go first. That garage story.
Oh, I wrote down a lot of notes. Yeah, go ahead with the garage story. I have.
Well, I just think so many things happen in the garage and you hit a backboard. But for me, um, it was overwhelming to have Andy Brandi reach out, and the idea of having connecting with Lisa with the backboard, and having then Kyle and Lisa came. I haven't been around her that much. Then I was at a social function with her, talked to her on the phone, but um, you've been helping now for a year and a half, and oh, negative can bring negative. I mean, there's actually, for our listeners, they would know that is that juniors are sent to me, and I'm told, character 101, we're sending them to see you, not for the forehand, and not for the backhand. And I have quite a few conference calls where, um, I used to tell people, my mother used to have a sign in the kitchen, don't feel sorry for yourself. And, but I mean, she's such a positive person. That's where people need to spend time, and just get on YouTube and look up Lisa and Love Serving Autism.
Yeah, some notes I had down. Started playing young, soccer and piano, endless hours on the backboard. Parents were marathon runners. We had a young player here, and her mom joined us. And when she wasn't working, she was here in the gym. And I mean, we were 2 hour session, 3 hour session. She was in the gym the whole time. And her daughter, one of the players that was with us, she could look over and just see her mom working out like an animal, and it was amazing to watch. And I think that's a great advantage and opportunity if parents can really show their kids what it means to be an athlete, really. Where Lisa said her parents had run 8-9 marathons. That's amazing. Some other notes I had is she just tried to hit the ball as hard as she could, and she was quietly competitive. Not an academy kid. I like the serve and volley license plate her husband has. She talked about she just knew what it felt like to hit the ball. She questioned pro tennis. Is this the life for me? And then she eventually found more fulfillment with her nonprofit here, Love Serving Autism, which she has a great story. It was really moving to talk to someone, listen to someone. Like
Yeah,
that.
the mom that was just here, she's visited, I think, 3 times with her young 8-year-old daughter. And so we have a classroom, and, we don't really give hourly lessons. I mean, certainly you come in and people are videotaped, and, we videotape people running, throwing, rallying, playing points, strokes, 3 different angles. So, I grew up playing ice hockey. The 3 stars coming to practice, and star number 1 was the mom who was just working out, courtside. We have a very nice setup where we can look right out our classroom and see 3 indoor courts. And we have one small area. I mean, here at the resort, there's a beautiful indoor, outdoor pool and fitness center, spa, but we just haven't, there's ample amount of equipment. I mean, it's $12,000-$15,000 worth of equipment. And just, I don't think it's really a matter of being an athlete as far as credentials and results. But, if Braden is, if you expect your students to do it, you should be able to do it. That doesn't mean that you've got to go out and, hit aces and win matches, but just put the work in. Just put the work in. No, that was you can just, her spirit, the human spirit. I mean, how's it go as a competitor? So it sounds like she definitely was the peaceful warrior when she played, but if you take your mind, your body, your tennis game, and then the human spirit, and then, you're just matching up against a person on the other side of the net. And a healthy competitor is going to think, okay, if you play 10 times, how many are you going to win? But, like, say, for example, this is the names, and she's obviously not the type of person who's a name dropper at all. But like the Malevas, 3 girls from Bulgaria. Now, their mother was part of the Communistic Party and control of indoor courts and control of sparring partners. So there's always the story behind the story, the backstory. But at one time, and I believe this is when they were only seeding players to 16, not to 32. But 3 different times, those 3 sisters were seeded at majors. People refer to it as Grand Slams. But that's, I tell people all the time, I lived in Boca Raton, and, Steffi Graf, everybody knows she's a very private person, but I mean, I had a chance to see her practice so many times, and it's like, whoa. And, really footwork really comes right down. It's head work first, but every mistake, I mean, that's pretty strong. Every mistake, for the most part, you could say it's based on footwork. But amazing story as a player. But then what she's done, for her journey in tennis and through education. And then now, and it's great to hear that, Kyle is, resigned from his position of 20 years. And obviously he's doing other things. I mean, she said he's speaking right now at I think a USPTA sectional conference, but tennis needs more people like Lisa, for sure. What a great.
Yeah. I agree.
A great hour and a half. Thank you very much for listening. Podcast 185. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, listeners. And Yvonne, thank you. You're the one who puts all this together.
Of course.
Until next time, that's the GreatBase Tennis Podcast.
Thank you. Adios.
Amigos.